everything has to go through mating. And so if humans don't have pretty interesting and complex psychological adaptations for mating, then we're kind of out of business. So, I mean, survival and mating. But if you're a sexually reproducing species, you have to go through the bottleneck of mating, and that is, it's not a simple process. Of course, if you're asexual, you don't have to go searching for a mate, but sexually reproducing species, you have to select a mate, you have to attract a mate. In our species, you have to be mutually selected by that mate. And then in our species, of course, we have long-term mating, pair bonded mating, which is extremely rare in the mammalian world. The male and king, we have something like 5,000 species plus of mammals, and only something like 3 to 5% have anything resembling pair bonded long-term mating. But humans do have it. It's part, and that's part of our nature. Now, as we get into mating strategies, one of the things that I argue is that long-term mating is not the only mating strategy within the human menu of mating strategies. And we have long-term pair bonded, but we also have short-term mating, casual sex hookups, as they're now called on college campuses. We have some infidelity rates, so that's kind of a mixed mating strategy, one long-term mate, some short-term sex partners on the side. And then we also do serial mating. And then if you look across cultures, we have, in Western cultures, a presumptively monogamous mating system, but some cultures have polygynous mating systems, one man, multiple wives, some restricted to 4, some don't have any restrictions. And then very, very rarely do you have a polyandrous mating system, less than 1%, where it's one woman, multiple men.
And do you have any sense of what conditions give rise to that rare exception, that polyandrous system, since it's so uncommon? How is it that it sustains itself? And why isn't that a challenge to the notion of a central monogamy, let's say?
Yes, well, the conditions under which it occurs are typically where one man cannot support a whole family. So if there's a large field and one man can't support a wife and children, then it will be 2 men. So the polyandrous mating is almost entirely brothers. And that genetic relatedness helps to ease what normally would be a pretty intense jealous reaction to someone else sharing a sex partner, someone else having sex with your wife.
So why isn't it sufficient to say, like the sort of more modern blank slate theorists might, that patriarchy is a sufficient explanation for the difference in mating strategies across the sexes, and that the reason that polyandry is so uncommon is because women are dominated by men everywhere, and that's arbitrary and expression of power. It has nothing to do with our central biological tendency.
So the first question is what does one mean by patriarchy? If you get into it, and I've asked people who invoke those sort of explanations, well, what do you mean by patriarchy? And usually that causes them to stumble and mumble around. Well, and they just know, well, patriarchy, as though it's self-explanatory. Well, it's not self-explanatory, because if you break it down analytically, you can identify different components. So is it the case that men worldwide tend to have more resources, more economic resources than women on average? Well, the answer is yes. But then even if you take that component of what's called patriarchy, you can ask the question, well, how did it come to pass that across all cultures, or nearly all cultures, men on average have more resources? Well, as men are one long breeding experiment run by women. Basically, women have a universal preference for men with resources. And so that sets up a coevolutionary process whereby those men who were chosen as mates tended to be motivated and have the ability and willingness to acquire resources and share.
So let me ask you about that specifically. This is a question that I tried to address. Do you know of any research pitting female mate choice in relationship to men against men who have resources versus men who show the traits that allow them to acquire resources, pitting those directly against one another?
Yeah, great question. And I'm not aware of any studies that have done that directly.
See, I think that, and I want to talk to you about this in relationship to the dark triad issue, which we'll get into. It seems to me that women use markers of status partly as indicators of available resources, because those are useful, but I don't think women are that uncanny, let's say. It's too simple. I think they use the presence of resources as a proxy for the personality and cognitive traits, let's say, including physical health, that would enable a man, even stripped of his current set of resources, to be highly likely to acquire them in the future. And maybe current resources are a good proxy for that.
One issue is that cash economies are relatively recent in our human history. I think maybe 7,000 to 10,000 years old. We are able to stockpile economic resources in a way that is evolutionarily unprecedented due to cash economies. But I think that you're absolutely right that what women tend to look for, and shows up even in my studies as well, is the characteristics that are statistically reliably correlated with resource acquisition, which will be things like intelligence, social status, dependability, athletic prowess. Is this guy a good hunter? So you go to a culture like the Ache of Paraguay, and basically what leads to high status in men is hunting skills. That's like the big main effect there. Even things like emotional stability and conscientiousness, which we know is linked with hard work and industriousness and achievement in modern work context, likely was true ancestrally as well. So women didn't want a guy who's going to be sitting around in the hammock all day, smoking whatever the local, weed or hallucinogen is. She's going to want a guy who has the motivation to get out there and hunt and bring back the bacon, so to speak.
Yeah, because hunting and getting to the point and hitting the target and aiming right and being specific with words and all of that kind of goal-oriented action, those are all very tightly related as far as I can tell psychologically. You talked about men as a breeding experiment run by women because we're unbelievably highly sexually selected. And that has to do with women's choosiness. And so, first of all, what's the evidence that suggests that women are, in fact, choosier when it comes to sexual partners than men? And how much choosier are they?
Sexual selection, so if natural selection, this is oversimplified, but is the evolution of adaptations due to their survival advantage or the survival advantage that accrued to the possessors. So things like fear of snakes, fear of heights, spiders, darkness, strangers, and so forth, food preferences, things that led to better survival. Sexual selection deals with the evolution of qualities that lead to mating success. And Darwin identified two causal processes by which mating success could occur. One is same-sex competition or intrasexual competition. He thought about it in terms of contest competition, where there was a physical battle, like two stags locking horns in combat, with the victor gaining sexual access to the female, loser ambling off with a broken antler, dejected with low self-esteem and probably needing some psychotherapy. But the logic was whatever qualities led to success in these same-sex battles, whether it be athleticism, strength, agility, cunning, or whatever, those qualities got passed on in greater numbers due to the sexual access that the victors accrued. Qualities associated with losing basically bit the evolutionary dust. The second component, so that's intrasexual competition, which actually the logic is more general than Darwin envisioned. So like in our species, as we were alluding to, we often compete for position and status hierarchies. And so we can engage in intrasexual competition without engaging in this physical battle or contest competition, although I think that the contest competition was also part of human evolutionary history with males. The other component process is basically what Darwin called female choice. And the logic there is that whatever qualities, if there's some consensus about the qualities that are desired, that men possessing the desired qualities have a mating advantage. They get preferentially chosen. Those lacking the desired qualities basically become incels or involuntarily celibate. They get shunned, banished, or ignored. Now, the twist on that, and so I think sexual selection is by far a more interesting process and definitely has occurred with respect to humans. But the twist there is that we have mutual mate choice, at least when it comes to long-term mating, especially when it comes to long-term mating.